unmet needs become unspoken frustration. And unspoken frustration is what becomes resentment. Welcome to Life and Love by Design. I'm life and relationship coach Odette Coronel. This podcast is for individuals and couples who are done living on autopilot, who are ready to understand the patterns shaping their relationships, their choices, and their sense of self, and redesign them with purpose and intention. Here, we don't just talk about what's hard. We name what's actually happening beneath it and what to do about it. And if you start recognizing yourself or your relationship in these conversations, know that this is the exact work that I do with my private coaching clients, individuals and couples who are ready for real change. Because a meaningful life and connected relationships don't happen by default. They're designed. So let's begin. Welcome back to Life and Love by Design. I'm your host, Odette Coronel, and today we're talking about a topic that I see all of the time with my coaching clients, and that topic is resentment. And we're going to look at what is it that your resentment is trying to tell you. So I'm going to start with a couple that I worked with recently, and I think that most of you, if you're in a marriage or a long-term relationship, or even if you have any relationship with anyone in your life that you care about, you might recognize yourself in this example. So I have this lovely couple. They have children and they love each other very deeply. They're hardworking. They're doing all the right things. And the mom in this situation, she works a job that's hybrid. So some days she works in the office and some days she works from home. And her job is really demanding. She has lots of calls. She's juggling deadlines. She's trying to stay on top of everything professionally. Now, her husband's job is a little bit more flexible. So he works very hard as well, but his schedule allows him to be home more often than she is. And so he is able to kind of take time and be there with the children, take them to their different activities, feed them, and do all of those things around the house that she's often not around to do. Now, on paper, this works great. It's a really functional system, but internally, something started to build. The wife had started to feel resentful because she kind of feels like she's missing everything. She feels like she's missing those day-to-day times with the children, like, school drop-offs and presentations and shows that they have during the day at school, or after school pickup, after school activities, all of those little milestones that the kids are having. She feels like she's missing out on that. So she works really hard and she loves her job and she's trying to be there as much as she can for her kids. But at the same time, she feels like she's losing time that she's never going to get back with her children. Now, what's happening is that at the very same time, her husband is also feeling resentful. He feels like he's the one holding everything together. He also works hard, but he's the one that's managing the meals and the routines and the daily pickups and the emotional meltdowns and just the constant, daily logistics of the kids. He feels like he's the one that's kind of carrying that load by himself for the most part. And, he starts to think things like, she's always at work and I'm the one that always has to pick up the slack and do everything. I never get a break. If I have to go somewhere, I have to bring the kids along with me and all those little tiny things. Now, the interesting thing is that I've seen this many, many times in the reverse, where the wife felt that she was the one that was doing everything for the children and managing work and home and everything else, and that the husband was always working and not as involved with the children and not supporting her as much as she wants to be supported. So this is not really about mom or dad or gender or anything like that. This can happen in any situation. But the point is that this couple, it was the husband that was around mostly for the children and the wife was always working. But it can happen, no matter what. So the point is that both of them are carrying resentment. And here's what's really important. Neither one of them is trying to hurt each other, but both of them are feeling unseen in very different ways. And that's what resentment looks like in real life. It's not, obvious conflict or shouting or crazy drama. It's really just two people who love each other very much, but they're slowly feeling unappreciated or unseen or disconnected or very alone in different parts of the life that they share together. So the question becomes, what's actually going on here? What's happening? And most importantly, what is their resentment trying to tell them? Resentment is just information. It's emotional data. It's just your system saying, something needs attention here. But most people don't treat resentment that way. They treat it like if it's a flaw in their character or like something's wrong in their relationship or something's wrong with themselves or something's wrong with their partner. Or they think that it's something that they have to suppress or they have to push it down or they have to blame their partner for. And most people just try to ignore that resentment or just live with it. But resentment, when it's ignored, it doesn't go away. It just builds and it gets bigger. And we start creating stories. And then eventually it starts to leak out in the tone that we use or in the distance that it creates in your relationship or the way you start criticizing each other or maybe withdrawing from each other. So instead of asking, how do I stop feeling resentful? We need to ask, what is my resentment trying to show me? If you're doing all the right things, you're showing up, you're holding it together, you're being capable and responsible, and yet something in your life and relationships or your marriage still feels off, then give me a few seconds of your time because this message is for you. Relationships don't usually fall apart because of one big event. More often, it's the small everyday moments when we stop being intentional, or we stop really listening, or we stop choosing connection. Those are the things that create distance over time. I work with thoughtful, high functioning individuals and couples who aren't broken, but they're feeling disconnected or misaligned or just wondering how they got here. In my coaching, we slow things down. We try to understand what's happening beneath the surface. We identify the patterns that are shaping your relationships and your choices, and then we intentionally design what comes next. So if you're listening and you're thinking, this feels like me, that's not an accident. I offer a complimentary relationship and life alignment audit. It's a focused 45-minute conversation where I'm going to help you gain clarity and identify what comes next. You can book your session by visiting odettecornell.com. I would love to connect with you. So now let's go back to our couple. What's interesting is that both of them have very valid emotional experiences happening at the same time. So neither one of them is wrong. The wife is experiencing grief about missing those special moments with her children. That's valid. Lots of moms feel that way. And she also feels pressure from work expectations. She feels emotional disconnection from family life sometimes. And she feels a sense of not being there enough. Now, the husband is experiencing like he has too much responsibility on his plate for the daily chores and the daily logistics of the children and the household. And he's also feeling fatigued and exhausted from carrying all of these emotional and physical responsibilities of managing the household and the children plus work. So he has some kind of like a sense of, I'm doing too much alone. So, what is the problem? Because neither one of them is wrong. And the problem is not a lack of effort from either one of them. And it's not a lack of love. And it's definitely not a lack of intention. They both have very good intentions. The problem is just unspoken emotional reality. They are living in the same house, but they're experiencing two very different internal stories. And the resentment starts to grow in that gap between what I'm doing and what I feel my partner sees and understands about what I'm doing. So resentment is often saying, I need something that I'm not expressing clearly. And in this couple's case, the wife may not be expressing, I miss my kids and I feel guilty and I feel torn. The husband might not be expressing, I feel like I'm overwhelmed and I'm carrying everything on my own. But instead of just expressing that, those emotions just turn into resentment because resentment is what shows up when vulnerability hasn't been spoken. So the very first message that your resentment is probably trying to tell you is that you are not fully expressing your needs. Most resentment begins right here when we assume that people should know. We assume that our effort should be noticed. We assume that love means understanding without having to ask. But your partner is not a mind reader. No one in your life that you love and care about is just going to know how you feel. Just like you're not going to know how your partner is feeling. So unmet needs become unspoken frustration. And unspoken frustration is what becomes resentment. So, a simple question to ask yourself is, what is it that I need that I have not clearly said out loud? So, the second message is that you're out of alignment with your boundaries or your capacity. So, in the example of the couple that I'm working with, the wife may be exceeding her emotional and physical capacity, trying to do everything at work and also everything at home. And the husband might be exceeding his capacity without any acknowledgement or support from his wife. So resentment starts to show up when we're consistently operating beyond what feels sustainable. So, a good question to ask yourself is, where am I extending myself and not adjusting my reality? The third message that your resentment might be trying to tell you is you feel unseen in your effort. Both partners in the example that I'm giving you feel that way. I know a lot of moms feel that way. I know I've felt that way. Like you're carrying so much and no one sees what you're doing. It may not be a reality, but it's just what it feels like. So, in this example, the wife feels unseen in her emotional sacrifice of missing that time with her children. And the husband feels unseen in the daily labor of keeping things running. And this is one of the most common resentment patterns in long term relationships. Oh my gosh, I think every couple goes through this. I see what I'm doing, but I don't feel seen by you. And when there's no appreciation or when we don't feel appreciated, resentment is what's going to fill its space. A fourth message that your resentment might be trying to tell you is that you are holding an unspoken story about fairness. And this is a big one because both partners often have an internal scoreboard about who's right and who's wrong or who does more than the other. So one partner might be thinking, I'm doing more, or I'm sacrificing more, or I have less freedom, or I have less support. But if you're keeping score and you're feeling that you're not being treated fairly and you're not telling your partner and you assume that they should know, then that assumption is going to quietly create distance in your relationship. The fifth message that your resentment might be trying to tell you is that you're feeling disconnected from yourself. And this is often underneath everything. This really is the root many times. Sometimes resentment towards a partner is actually disconnection from yourself. The wife may be grieving, not just that she's not spending enough time with her children, but loss of presence for herself. And the husband might be operating on autopilot without space to acknowledge his own emotional needs and his own emotional load. So resentment often shows up when we're not listening to ourselves anymore. So, what do we do with resentment? Here is where we shift because awareness alone is not enough. We need movement. So, I want to give you a simple framework that I often use with my clients. Step one, name it without blame. Instead of saying, you never help, try saying, I'm noticing that I'm feeling resentful and I want to try to understand it better. This changes everything. It takes you out of attack and into curiosity. The second step is get curious about the need that's underneath. Ask yourself, what is the unmet need underneath what I'm feeling? Not who's wrong in this situation, but, what do I actually need right now? Three is communicate your internal experience, and not just the complaint, but really the truth that's underneath it. I miss time with my kids and I'm really struggling with that. Or I'm feeling overwhelmed and I need more support than I'm currently admitting to. This is where connection starts to rebuild when we start to be vulnerable with one another and we communicate. Step four is redesign the system together. Resentment usually signals that the current structure just isn't working. So the question becomes, what needs to change in how we're doing life together? Not as blame, but as design, because, relationships are not static. They're living systems and we're constantly changing and growing and evolving. And we need to make sure that we're adjusting and adapting as we go. So, in my work with couples and individuals, I help people slow this process down. And we don't just focus on the behavior, but we really look at what's underneath it, what's behind it. So, we explore what is actually being felt. What is it that's not being said? What patterns are they repeating? Where is each person disconnecting from themselves? And how do we rebuild emotional clarity and communication? Because most couples, they really don't need more effort. What they need is more understanding. They need more language and awareness and more honesty in safe spaces. So, if you take nothing else from this episode, I want you to remember that resentment is not a failure in your relationship. It's just a signal that something inside of you is asking to be seen, named, and understood. And when you learn how to really listen, resentment stops being something that quietly erodes your relationship. And instead, it starts to really become something that can actually guide you back to connection. So, thank you for being here with me today. If this episode resonated with you, please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast, share the episode with someone that you think needs to hear it, like it. And remember that love doesn't happen by accident. The best relationships are designed. See you next time. If today's episode described you or your relationship, then this is your moment. You don't need more information. You need a new way of living, choosing, and relating. And that's the work I do with individuals and couples. If you're ready to stop repeating the same patterns and start designing your life and relationships intentionally, visit the link in the show notes and book a complimentary relationship and life audit. Remember, your life and your love are yours to design.